Don't let the opening cutscene fool you. This is the first Metroid game. Even if you've never touched it, you know how legendary Super Metroid is. By refining the gameplay of the first two games, Super pretty much invented a new genre. Hollow Knight, Ori, Bloodstained. These games owe everything to Super Metroid. With the industry having 30 years to innovate and improve, words cannot express how incredible it is that this game can still hold its own against modern titles of the genre. But before we can talk about how Super Metroid is the best game ever made, we need to talk about how Super Metroid is the worst game ever made. The most remarkable part about Super Metroid's influential design is how much of it probably happened by accident. In the 80s and 90s, it was near impossible to fit more than an hour's worth of content on a cartridge. But you can't expect consumers to buy something for full price that they'll exhaust in a single afternoon. A video game back then was supposed to last a kid an entire summer, so developers had to find some way to extend that playtime. Many NES-era games accomplished this by being brutally difficult. This can be seen in games like Mega Man, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, Super accomplishes this by making the game very cryptic and open. While this is seen as the main trait that set Super apart from other games at the time, I find it hard to believe that the developers designed it out of an artistic vision and not just an attempt to artificially lengthen the game. Intentional or not, the level design is still incredible. I mean, look at this part here. No, wait, here. Maybe over here. No, I just went that way. Hang on, let me check the map again. Yeah, this is probably going to be the most controversial thing I say in this video, but sometimes Super's level design goes from challenging but satisfying to solve to just poorly designed. No future Metroids are designed nearly as open as Super, which makes me feel at the very least the developers agreed that this was outdated. For those who have heard of Super Metroid but haven't played it, you're probably under the impression that the game is very open-ended in how you can collect upgrades, beat bosses, and explore the world. Well, unless you're one of these guys, it's actually not. While the game offers the player many paths to explore at one time, there's really only ever one intended path through the upgrades and bosses. While smart players can find short sequence breaks or skip a couple unnecessary upgrades, you're not going to discover a unique alternate route like you could in a game like Hollow Knight. What instead happens is you'll have multiple long paths ahead of you, with only one containing a well-hidden right answer. Finding that answer is very satisfying, and this is when Super Metroid's gameplay loop is at its best. However, most of the time when you get stuck, you'll end up completely leaving the area, because there really isn't anything telling you where you should be looking for the solution. I know it's going to be easy to say, it's not confusing, get good, but don't pretend like you didn't have to use a guide a double-digit amount of times your first playthrough. You got lost your first playthrough, your second playthrough, and in your third playthrough, you got to Kraid, felt confident, and spent another 2 hours trying to find the ghost ship. I remember the biggest issue I had with Super on my first playthrough was the glass pipe in Meridia. When I finally figured out the answer, I didn't feel accomplished, I just felt like kind of an idiot. When the exact same puzzle appears in Dread, everything about it is just communicated better, and it works. I know I've spent a lot of time painting this game to be outdated and unfun, but that couldn't be further than my actual feelings on it. I just wanted to point this stuff out because future installments do a great job improving on them. These pace-breaking sections probably only make up about 15% of the game. When you're just booking it through puzzles and mazes and enemies, you become Samus, and the game is phenomenal. It's just important to remember that this annoying 15% exists whenever people exaggerate and try to claim that Super Metroid is the greatest video game ever made. Now, here's why Super Metroid is the greatest video game ever made. I've already touched a lot on the main gameplay, which I can summarize as really fun until you get stuck. What this game truly perfects is a little thing called atmosphere. Nothing else truly feels like Super Metroid, not even other Metroids. The creepy, disgusting 16-bit sprites combined with the music and lack of guidance truly makes you feel alone and endangered. These genuine feelings of hostility from the enemies and world makes it even cooler when you finally best them. As you conquer tougher and crazier looking enemies and bust through more doors, puzzles, and barriers, you start to feel a very satisfying sense of power. By the end of this game, you're going to end up feeling like this guy. Although you're probably still this guy. I think now would be a good time to talk about the story, to better get across my point about atmosphere. All you need to know going in is that the Metroids are very dangerous. You blow up the people who misused them, and all of the Metroids are dead. Except for one.
The baby.
Then you boot up the game. Bam! Ridley bursts in and steals the baby Metroid.
The baby.
My favorite part of this is that they set up the Metroids to be so dangerous that the idea of just one left out there in the hands of evil is enough to still be a ginormous threat. So you chase Ridley down yourself and that's it for a while. The game shuts up and lets you spend the entire second act building up a grudge against a purple dinosaur. Upgrade yourself, hone your skills, and beat him and every other boss down. Every praise I've had about Super up to this point is taken to the 10th degree in the boss fights. The designs are all fantastic, and you feel like a god after taking them down. This all, of course, culminates in the Ridley fight. It starts off identically to the one at the start of the game, only this time, I got the high jump boots. There really isn't a ton of strategy to this fight, and there really didn't have to be. You just pump his face with lead before he can melt you. The fight really embraces that sense of power I keep bringing up. Despite how strong he looks and how built up this fight is, you're powerful enough to just tank most of his hits, and then fire back hard. And it's awesome. The story is really good. It's simple, brief, but leaves a huge impact that keeps you coming back. Something else that has kept people coming back is sequence breaking and the speedrunning aspect of the game. You know, these guys. For those who aren't familiar with speedrunning culture, Super Metroid is the speedrunning game. There are several glitches that can be exploited in runs, but remarkably, there are also multiple hidden techniques built into the game by the developers. Everyone knows about the wall jump and the shine spark, but then there's also stuff like this. You didn't know that was in the game. The developers knew people would be inclined to master their game once they figured out the route. They knew that their level design invited sequence breaking, so instead of ignoring it or forcing players to play their games strictly the way they intended it to be played, they fully embraced this and gave all types of players options. It's mind-blowing to me that they were able to figure this out in 1994, when there are still games being made today that haven't figured this out. This is why many people consider Super Metroid a masterpiece, and the best Metroid game. Despite its flaws, developers had a complete understanding of what makes a game like this fun. Then, they forgot all of it. This game sucks. People often criticize Fusion by saying it's too linear. But as I said earlier, Super Metroid is linear too, unless you're this guy. No, it goes much further than that, because I firmly believe that every single thing that Super Metroid excels at, Fusion goes out of its way to do the exact opposite. I'm going to break it down into 3 categories. What makes Super Metroid fun? Exploration, growth, atmosphere. Let's see how Fusion handles these aspects one by one. I already mentioned Fusion's linearity, and while Super has one clearly intended path through the game, it feels more open because the player isn't told what that path is. You can get lost in the world. You can learn the world. This turns something as simple as progressing through the world into a key gameplay element. It's as if the map itself is a puzzle to solve. Fusion throws all this out the window in exchange for Google Earth over here. This computer single-handedly ruins the game for me. It would be one thing to take the map and make it more streamlined and fix all the parts that were too cryptic in Super Metroid, but you still need to preserve that sense of discovery and adventure. In Super Metroid, you are Samus Aran, intergalactic bounty hunter. In this game, you are the errand boy for Plankton's wife. Before every objective of the game, he tells you in disgusting detail what is happening, what challenges you should expect to see in the next 10 minutes of gameplay, and the exact location of your objective. I don't think I need to explain why this is such a huge slap in the face of the series level design. This was the example that really ruined Fusion for me during my first playthrough. Sector 4. Elon Musk's son over here tells you that Sector 4 is a water level. There are electrical hazards you need to shut off, there's a giant water monster you have to kill, and he moves very fast. Then you play the level, and it's a water level, there are electrical hazards you need to shut off, there's a giant water monster you have to kill, and he moves very fast. Now let's try this again, only this time there is no computer. You enter Sector 4. You have a hard time traversing the stage due to the water and electricity. You see wreckage throughout the stage. You wonder, what could have caused all this destruction? This feeling builds up over the course of the area until you are dropped into the arena. You were of course expecting a boss, but you were overwhelmed by the beast's speed and power. There's no way you could defeat something this fast, right? But you figure out the pattern, and just like the level before, you conquer what first seemed impossible to conquer. You get the upgrade and feel accomplished and empowered. That's what makes a Metroid game great. The most frustrating part is that nothing needs to be added to Fusion to accomplish this. All they would have to do is remove Clippy over here. There actually are a few instances of this type of boss foreshadowing in the game, but they managed to screw that up too. The two fights that come to mind are Nightmare and Neo Ridley. So when you first enter Sector 5, you'll occasionally see this large shadow move across the background. This would be excellent foreshadowing and build-up if you fought the boss relatively soon after seeing these shadows. However, you don't actually fight Nightmare until several hours of gameplay later. By then you've probably forgotten all about those first shadows and, surprise, Apple TV Plus has to tell you all about it beforehand. Now, I could actually understand someone disagreeing with me on this. There isn't much about Nightmare explained to you, and there is a lot of decent visual foreshadowing when you enter Sector 5 the second time to fight him. He's also by far the most strange and interesting boss in the game, so I do respect any opinions in favor of how this section of the game was handled. What I do not respect is what they did with Ridley. In one of the only moments of free exploration in the game, players will likely stumble across this optional freezer room. If you tank through the damage, you'll find Ridley's frozen body. Not his shadow, not his tail, his entire body. This is not foreshadowing. This is a spoiler. I didn't know Ridley was in the game. I wish I still didn't know Ridley was in the game until I actually had to fight him. Imagine how shocked I would have been being dropped into an arena and finding Ridley. Better yet, when you finally enter his room, the game fakes you out and you don't get to actually fight him until much later. This would have been a great fake out if it was the first time you see him. The way things are now, however, you're like, oh, how anticlimactic. I've been waiting hours to fight him. Oh well. By the time you actually get to fight him for real, all novelty has worn off, and I just could not bring myself to care anymore. The fight itself is fun though. Now, onto the second core gameplay pillar of Metroid, growth. In Super Metroid, you feel more and more powerful as you collect upgrades. Most normal enemies could usually be tanked through or one-shot without much thought to help emphasize this feeling of growth and empowerment. You are not stuck on this planet with deadly aliens. Deadly aliens are stuck on this planet with you. Fusion puts a twist on this idea by making Samus extremely fragile, which is a great idea. No wait, hang on. For story reasons, Samus's defense is extremely low, meaning even normal enemies could pose a threat. This might have been able to work if later in the game you finally regained your former strength. By removing your strength, you would have something more tangible to work towards. The player would gain a larger appreciation for Samus at her full power, and would feel more rewarded as they grew throughout the game. But here's the thing. Samus does not overcome her weakness and become Super Metroid powerful again until the literal last 45 seconds of the game. I think what they were going for was a Metroid game with more emphasis on combat than exploration. What this translates to, however, is a harsh difficulty curve. This is by far the most difficult Metroid game, which is such a bizarre contrast to how overbearingly handholdy it is. It's like if you helped a child walk across a street, and then shot them. What could have been a satisfying learning and growth curve is broken by high health bars, tedious attack cycles, and single attacks that do half your health. When I die in this game, I don't think,
finally, a worthy opponent.
I instead think,
Stop. Stop hurting America.
Okay, now let me...
I think the main problem with the combat is a lack of depth. In order to increase the difficulty in a Metroidvania, you have three options. First, you can make the map more elaborate. This is what Super did, but we've established that the developers wanted to go into a different direction for Fusion. Okay, fine. Second is movement. Give the player a more complicated moveset and more treacherous level design in order to test the player's platforming and reaction skills. Fusion could have done this, but they only added the ledge grab to Samus' skill set and kept the landscape pretty tame to fit the space station aesthetic. The movement was actually nerfed in some aspects too, because Samus no longer has a designated run button and you can no longer wall jump on a single wall. This just leaves combat as the only dial they can use to scale up the difficulty. While they did change the game to further emphasize combat, they didn't change the combat itself. In Metroid Dread, Samus's upgrades don't just allow you to access new areas, they also introduce new ways for Samus to move. By the end of the game, you have multiple ways to dodge, counter, and attack. As the game gets more difficult, the fights explore new and more complex combinations of these abilities. Metroid Fusion wants to do this, but is limited to a Super Metroid moveset. Even worse, the GBA has 2 fewer buttons than an SNES controller. When all you can do is jump and shoot, the developers are limited in ways they can increase combat complexity. When you die in Dread, you have the ability to approach the situation differently on the next attempt. In Fusion, you just have to repeat the same strategy until you win. This results in unforgiving, frustrating difficulty as opposed to a complex but fair challenge. I've decided to end with atmosphere because it's the strongest element Fusion has going for it. Fusion strives to be more story-based and aims to instill feelings of isolation, fear, and being trapped. It succeeds in delivering these feelings to the player, albeit at the cost of gameplay. The story of Fusion goes like this. Now that all the Metroids are dead, the X-Parasite, a far more dangerous threat that the Metroids used to prey on, is loose. The X can consume their hosts and replicate their behavior. One nearly kills Samus, so they have to remove her from her suit and give her a vaccine made from Metroid DNA.
The baby.
This vaccine makes her weaker.
We are doing this to our children.
She is, however, now immune to the X-Parasites, making her the perfect person to terminate them from this Federation space station. Fusion definitely ventures into the horror elements more so than any other game in the franchise. The X sometimes transform their hosts into gross approximations of what they used to look like. The example that most sticks in my mind are the infected corpses of what used to be Federation scientists. Possibly the most famous part of Metroid Fusion is the SAX, a powerful X who infected Samus's armor and now patrols the game and hunts you down. On paper, this is a genius idea. Despite all the horrific enemy designs in this franchise, Samus is by far the scariest thing in the galaxy. This is really cool. You are being hunted by the ultimate version of yourself from the previous game. It can blast through enemies, sequence break, and, actually have fun. This could have been a great opportunity for visual tutorials for advanced techniques similar to the animals in the previous game, or just a symbol of the power you need to regain by the end of the game. Instead, Fusion opted to use it for pure horror. This, again, could have been a great idea, but the implementation just isn't that fun. Encounters with the SAX are not only few and far between, but they feel way too scripted. Fighting the SAX almost feels like watching a movie. You can't kill it, you can't really find creative ways to evade it. Unless you're this guy. You either complete these sequences exactly how the game wants you to, or you die in 2 hits. I know a lot of people out there love the SAX, most of them probably revisit Fusion only for the SAX, but it just seems like a great concept, drowning an untapped potential. You don't even really get the opportunity to pummel this thing into the ground once you're strong enough to confront it. He just kinda leaves.
We'll meet again, Spider-Man!
You'll notice I haven't talked much about the details of the story, and that's because it's way more complicated than Super's and a lot less interesting. There's so much exposition just thrown at you for things you have no personal connection to and really make no difference in the end. Why would you tell us there's more than one SAX if I never get to see more than one of them? Wouldn't it have been cooler if I was dropped into a room with 2 or 3 to outmaneuver? Why would you reveal to me that the SAX was searching for the Metroids right after I saw them search for the Metroids? Wouldn't it have been cooler if we realized that it would try to hunt them down and use that to our advantage? Maybe there could have been a cool sequence where we lured the SAX to the Metroids as a trap. It's so frustrating how many great ideas this game just throws aside for the absolute minimum. Let's look at the very end of the game to see what I'm talking about. Remember in Super when you fight Mother Brain? You use your full power, but eventually she whittles you down. When all hope seems lost, you get saved at the last moment and become hypercharged. Let's see how Fusion does literally the exact same thing. You walk into this final boss. Despite the game being almost over, they still deny you that feeling of being in control. You can do no damage, and you also cannot die. You get hit once and are left with 1 health. Only then does the SAX fuse with you and you can fight. Do you see what I'm saying? This game looks like a Metroid game, but it plays like a theme park ride, a micromanaged simulation meant to replicate the experience Super provided. It has all the pieces, but it's missing the fun, the freedom, the flair.
This town isn't big enough for two supervillains.
Oh, you're a...
Metroid game.
Alright, it's just not a super one.
The way I see it, the main theme of Fusion is helplessness. You're helpless against the SAX, you're helplessly trapped in the space station, and no matter how hard you push, no matter how much you struggle, you can't skip this dialogue! The game is more than competent. It succeeds at doing everything it tries to do. I just wish the things it tried to do were more fun. There are a couple things I like about Fusion. I love the visual style, the sound design is much better, your shots and missiles feel like they have more of an impact, even if they technically don't. Besides that, this game has always been a huge disappointment for me. They had 8 years to follow up on Super, and they somehow forgot to add all the elements that made that game special. And then 2 years later they remembered it again, but this game is still disappointing. Metroid Fusion is a game I deeply dislike, yet I keep coming back to it. It's not like the Metroid franchise died with Fusion or anything. Like I said earlier, I'm a big fan of Zero Mission and Dread. This leaves Fusion as a black sheep of the franchise. I've gone into way too much detail on why I don't like the decisions that were made with this game, but I'm not confused by any of them. I can understand the thought process behind every single choice the developers made. Why make the same game 4 times in a row when you could change the setting, the tone, the gameplay, the genre? I mean, how many other GBA horror games are there? There are thousands of games out there. Most people will probably play less than 1% of them, if that, and remember even fewer. Metroid Fusion is a game that I can't forget. It takes up so much of my mental real estate that I felt the need to make a 20 to 25-ish minute video about it. It must have taken a lot of guts to take such a well-loved and critically well-received game and decide to take the sequel in a completely different direction. Much like how the original Metroid games took the template of a 2D platformer and changed the presentation, Fusion takes Super's template and does something completely new. In a strange way, this makes Fusion the most Metroid-y Metroid game. If you take anything from this video, it should be this. Please go buy Metroid Dread for full price, it's really good and these games don't sell that great and I want Nintendo to make another one before I die. Okay, thank you, goodbye.